I was called the Iron Duke before I ever earned the name, and I confess I had grown fond of it. A man who is feared is rarely troubled. He is not asked to dance, nor to make conversation, nor to pretend that the tedious are charming. He is left in peace at the head of his own table, and peace, in the autumn of the year I turned 34, was the only thing I believed I still wanted. So when Miss Wren Adair looked me full in the eye across the length of that table, and told me I was wrong, I did not at first understand what had happened to me. Let me set the scene properly, for it matters. Blackthorn Hall had been in my family for 200 years, a great gray pile of stone crouched on the edge of the moor, and every autumn I filled it with people I did not much like. My aunt insisted upon it. A house without guests is a mausoleum, Alaric, she would say, and I refuse to be entombed with you. The Dowager Countess of Marrowdale was my late mother's sister, a small ferocious woman of 70 who feared nothing on this earth, and it was she who had brought the companion. I had not troubled to learn the girl's name. She was one of those quiet gray figures who trail behind wealthy old women, fetching shawls and reading aloud and being spoken over as though they were furniture. She had arrived that afternoon in a gown the color of ash, with her hair pinned back so severely it might have been done by a magistrate, and she had said nothing at all when I greeted my aunt in the great hall. I had taken her for a mouse. I remember I did not so much as look at her twice. I remember it because I have had cause, in every year since, to marvel at the man who did not look twice, to marvel that I very nearly walked past the whole of my own happiness because it had come to me in an ash-gray gown, and had the ill manners to be poor. At dinner I discovered my error. We were 11 at table. There was Lord Fenwick, who talked of hounds, his wife, who talked of Lord Fenwick, a pair of marriageable heiresses my aunt had arranged like flowers on either side of me, and there, halfway down in the seat of least consequence, the companion. I was holding forth on the campaigns of the ancients. I have a weakness for it, and my guests never dared contradict me, and I made some observation about a general of Rome, some confident thing I had said 100 times before and had never once been made to doubt. A voice came from halfway down the table, clear and level, and not the least bit loud. "That isn't right, Your Grace." The room went still. I remember the sound of a footman's breath catching behind me. I remember Lady Fenwick's fork stopping in the air, halfway to her mouth and staying there. 11 years I had sat at that table, and no one, not a bishop, not a minister, not my own aunt, had ever said those 3 words to me over the meat. I turned. She was looking at me steadily, that gray little companion, her fork resting against her plate, and there was not one flicker of apology in her face. "I beg your pardon," I said, in the voice that had silenced better than her. "You said the general burned his own bridges to trap the enemy," she said. "He didn't. He burned them behind himself to trap his own men so that they could not flee and had no choice but to win. It is a different thing entirely, and rather the whole point of the story." She paused, and then, because apparently the ruin was not yet complete, she added, "The original is in the 3rd book. If you doubt me, Your Grace, I can give it to you in the Latin." Somewhere down the table, Lord Fenwick made a small strangled noise into his wine. "Now, I want you to understand the man I was, because otherwise none of what followed will make any sense to you. I had not been contradicted at that table in 11 years. My father had raised me to believe that a Ravenscliffe was right by virtue of being a Ravenscliffe, that softness was weakness and doubt was disgrace, and that the correct response to insolence was cold and total annihilation. I had watched my father annihilate a curate once, at that very table, for a mild disagreement about a hymn, watched a grown man reduced to stammering silence and shown, at the meal's end, quietly to the door. I was 9. I learned the lesson my father intended, that to be a Ravenscliffe was to be unanswerable. I had spent the next quarter of a century proving it. I had annihilated cabinet ministers. I had annihilated bishops. I had annihilated, God forgive me, a good many people who had done nothing worse than be less certain than I was. I opened my mouth to annihilate her. And she raised one eyebrow, one single eyebrow, as though she could see the whole speech coming and had already found it dull. "Then give it to me," I said. She gave it to me, in the Latin, every word from memory, in an accent cleaner than my old tutor's, and when she had finished she translated it back with a small dry precision, and she was, of course, entirely correct. I had been wrong for 11 years, and 11 years of frightened men had let me stay wrong, and this penniless girl in an ash-gray gown had put it right over the fish course without so much as raising her voice. I should have been furious. I had every right, by the rules of the world I had been raised in, to be furious. Instead, I sat there feeling something I had not felt in longer than I could remember, and it took me a long moment to name it, because it had been so many years since anyone had given it to me. I felt interested. "You have Latin," I said. "My father was a parson, your grace. He had no sons and a great many books, and I was a poor substitute for the first but a very willing reader of the second." She returned to her fish. "I did not mean to embarrass you. I only cannot bear to hear a good story told badly." Across the table, the prettier of my two heiresses, a Lady Sophia Vane, whom I shall have a great deal more to say about presently, gave a little laugh, high and cruel, and said, "How singular to have a companion who lectures dukes," and looked to me to join her. I did not join her, and I saw, in the small silence that followed my not joining her, that Lady Sophia noted it, and filed it away, the way a clever, cold woman files away everything she means one day to use. "Miss," I said, and stopped, because I did not know the girl's name, and the not knowing suddenly shamed me. Here was the sharpest mind at my table, and I had thought her furniture and had not asked. "Adair," said my aunt, watching me over her wineglass with an expression I did not like at all. "Miss Wren Adair, and you needn't look so thunderstruck, Alaric. I have been telling you for a decade that someone ought to argue with you. It is bad for a man to always be right. It makes him stupid." "I am rarely right, it appears," I said. "I have only been unopposed." My aunt set down her glass. It was, I think, the first genuinely humble thing she had ever heard me say, and it silenced her more thoroughly than Miss Adair's Latin had silenced the room. She looked at me for a moment as though she had misplaced her nephew and found a stranger in his chair. Miss Adair looked up at me then, and for the first time something moved behind that careful gray composure, surprise, I thought, that I had not struck back. She had braced for the annihilation. She had said her piece expecting to be destroyed for it, the way a person braces before a blow they have decided to take on principle. I have come to understand in the years since exactly what that costs, to know the blow is coming, to know you cannot afford it, to have no character to fall back on and no bread if you lose your place, and to say the true thing anyway because the alternative is to be a coward, and she would rather starve than be a coward. She had wagered her whole security on a point of Latin, and I had not delivered the blow. "Unopposed is a lonely way to be right," she said quietly. Then she looked back down at her plate and would not meet my eye again for the rest of the meal, and I spent the whole of the remaining courses trying to catch it and failing, and Lord Fenwick told me twice that my claret was excellent, and I did not hear a word of it. That was the beginning. I did not know it was the beginning. I thought it was merely a strange evening. I have since learned that we almost never recognize the beginnings of the things that remake us. We only recognize them afterward, working backward, marveling that we walked through the door of our whole life and mistook it for an ordinary Tuesday. She avoided me for 3 days, which at Blackthorn is no easy feat. I told myself I was not seeking her out. I told myself a great many things that autumn, but the house was full and the days were wet, and I found that I had begun to notice, with an attention I did not examine too closely, exactly which room she was in. I noticed she took her breakfast early, before the guests came down. I noticed she preferred the small east parlor, where the morning light was best for mending. I noticed she never sat with the other companions and poor relations who clustered near the fire and traded complaints. She sat a little apart, with a book she was not supposed to have time for, reading in the stolen minutes between one errand and the next like a woman drinking from a stream she is not permitted to stop at. I found her in the library on the fourth day. It is the finest room in the house. That library, my father's one act of generosity, was to books, though he read almost none of them. He bought them the way he bought everything to be seen to own, and I had gone there to escape the heiresses, who had taken to lying in wait for me in the morning room. Miss Adair was already there, up on the rolling ladder in a shaft of gray light, and she did not hear me come in, and so for a moment I simply stood in the doorway and watched her. She was not being a companion. That was the thing that struck me, that stopped me in the doorway with my hand still on the frame. When she fetched my aunt's shawls, she moved like a woman folded small, taking up as little of the world as she could, her shoulders drawn in, her eyes down, the posture of a person who has learned that to be noticed is to be in danger. But alone among the books, with no one to be small for, she had unfolded. She stood straight. Her chin was up. There was a book open in one hand, and she was reading it with her whole face, her lips moving very slightly over the words, and she looked, I will say the word, though it startled me at the time and startles me a little still, she looked free, as though the library were the one country in the world where she held a passport. Then a floorboard betrayed me, and she looked up, and the folding began at once, that terrible instant refolding, the chin coming down, the shoulders coming in. She started down the ladder. Don't, I said. Stay where you are. You'll break your neck hurrying on my account, and then my aunt will be inconsolable, and it will be entirely my fault, and I shall have to hear about it for the rest of my natural life. She stopped, a flicker of something, not quite a smile, at the corner of her mouth. I did not think you the sort of man to worry over a companion's neck, Your Grace. I am not generally. I am making an exception. What are you reading? She hesitated, and I watched her weigh it, the safe answer against the true one, and I watched the true one win because it always won with her. It was the deepest thing in her, deeper than fear, that she would not lie even when a lie was cheap and the truth was costly. The Greek tragedies, the one about the man who tries to outrun a prophecy and runs directly into it. She closed the book over her thumb, marking her place. You have them in the original. I have never held them in the original before. At the parsonage we had only a translation, and a poor one, and I used to imagine what the real words might be. I used to lie awake and try to guess at them. She looked almost embarrassed to have confessed it. It is not the sort of thing a companion is meant to want. And what is a companion meant to want? A dry room, a kind mistress, to be useful enough that no one troubles to be cruel. She said it flatly, the way a person recites a lesson learned young and learned hard, a catechism of smallness. I have the first two, which is a great deal more than most in my situation, and I am grateful for them every single day. Your aunt is the best woman I have ever served. She lets me read. Most would not. That is not an answer to my question. I asked what you want. You told me what you have. They are not the same, or you would not have said it so carefully. She was quiet for a moment up there in the light. Then she said, You are a very dangerous man to talk to, Your Grace. You ask the questions one has spent years learning not to answer, and you ask them as though you truly want to know, which is worse. I do truly want to know. It is a novelty. Indulge it. Come down and argue with me about the tragedy instead. You clearly have opinions. I could see them from the doorway, and I have not had a good argument in 11 years, and I find I have developed rather a hunger for it. Consider it a service to your host. He is starving. She came down. She did argue. I cannot tell you how good it was. She thought the doomed man of the tragedy was a fool who might have chosen differently at any of a dozen turns, that the prophecy was only a mirror, and the man broke himself against his own nature. I thought he was a man crushed by a machine he could not see, and no more free than a stone rolling downhill, and that to blame him was to blame the stone. We went at it for the better part of an hour. She gave no ground. She granted me nothing I had not earned, and she took back everything I said carelessly, catching my lazy phrases the way a sharp fencer catches a dropped guard, and when I made a genuinely good point, I made two, I think in the whole hour she stopped and went still and considered it honestly, turning it over and then said, "Yes, that is fair." I had not thought of it that way, and something in me lit up like a boy handed a sweet. I cannot properly explain to you what that was like after 11 years. Do you know what it is to be flattered for a decade? It is a slow starvation. Every man who agrees with you takes something from you and leaves you emptier, because you always know that he agrees because you are a duke and he wants your favor, and so his agreement is worth exactly nothing. And after a while, your own rightness comes to seem worth nothing too, and you cannot tell any longer whether a single thing you believe is true or merely unopposed, and you are alone at the top of a cold mountain of yes, and you cannot even trust the mountain, because you built it yourself out of other men's fear. And here was a girl with no fortune and no rank and nothing on earth to gain, who did not care in the slightest that I was a duke, who would tell me to my face when I was wrong and grant it honestly when I was right, and whose yes, when I finally wrung it from her, was worth more than every courtier in England, because it was real, because she could as easily have said no, and had twice in the same hour. I did not fall in love with her that afternoon. I want to be truthful with you, because the truth is the only thing she ever wanted from anyone, and I try to honor it even now. It was not so sudden as that. But that afternoon I understood, for the first time in my adult life, that I had been lonely, that the peace I had prized was not peace at all but merely the silence of a room everyone is afraid to enter. And I had not known it. The way a man walking a long time in the cold does not know how cold he is until he steps at last into a warm room and begins, painfully, to thaw. When my aunt's bell rang and she folded herself small again and went, I watched the free woman vanish and the companion return in the space of a breath. I stood in the emptied library and I thought, I want that back. Whatever that was, I want it back, and I want it every day, and I do not know what I am going to do about the fact that I want it. I was in a great deal more trouble than I knew. I contrived to see her. I am not proud of the methods. I set my aunt reading a great deal, so that her companion would be sent to the library for books. I took to walking the East Terrace in the mornings, because it passed the window of the little parlor where she sat with her mending. I invented a sudden interest in my aunt's health, purely so that I might inquire after it and be told, at length, by the woman who tended her. I was a man of 34 who had faced cannon, and I was reduced to loitering in my own corridors like a lovesick boy, and I could not stop. Miss Adair saw through every one of these stratagems within a week. She was far too clever not to. "You are a very busy man of late, your grace," she said to me one morning on the terrace, not slowing her step, her work-basket on her arm. "I find you everywhere. It is quite remarkable how a house of 40 rooms should have grown so small. I have taken an interest in the running of my own household. You have taken an interest in the corridors your aunt's companion is obliged to walk." She stopped and faced me, and there was no coyness in it, none of the practiced flutter of the heiresses who had made an art of being pursued, only that level honesty that I was coming to treasure and to dread in equal measure. "I would ask you to stop." That checked me. Have I given offense? No, she looked away, out over the moor which was going gold and brown with the turning year, the bracken rusting on the hills. "That is rather the trouble. You have not given offense. You have been kind and clever, and you listen when I speak, which no one of your rank has ever done in the whole of my life, and it is very pleasant, your grace, and pleasant is a thing I cannot afford." She turned back to me, and I saw that she meant it, all the way down to the floor of her. "I am a companion. In 3 weeks this house party ends, and your aunt and I go back to Marrowdale, and you go on to whatever a duke goes on to Parliament, and to marrying one of those heiresses your aunt has arranged so prettily on either side of you. And I go on being grateful for a dry room. If I let myself grow accustomed to being spoken to as though I were a person, I will not be able to bear going back to being furniture. Do you understand? You are teaching me a hunger I will have to live without. So I am asking you plainly as one honest creature to another, please stop being kind to me. It is the cruelest thing you could do, and you are doing it, I think, without once considering the cost, because the cost is not yours. It never falls on you, it falls on me. I have faced men across a dueling ground. I have stood in the Lords and been shouted at by the most powerful men in England, and not moved a muscle of my face. Nothing had ever struck me as hard as that quiet, reasonable request, delivered on a cold terrace by a woman in an ash-gray gown who was asking me, out of pure self-preservation, to leave her alone, and who was right, entirely right, and knew she was right, and knew too that being right had never once saved a woman in her position from anything. And if I do not wish to stop, I heard myself say, then you are a selfish man who values his own amusement above a poor woman's peace, she said, and I have been badly mistaken in you, and I would rather know it now, while it costs me only a little, than later, when it will cost me everything. There it was again, that fearlessness that was not recklessness but something far braver, a courage that counted the cost exactly and paid it anyway. She had just called a duke selfish to his face, on his own terrace, when a word from me could have seen her turned out without a character and left to starve on the road, and she had done it because it was true, and because she would not be a coward even to save herself, and even though her voice had shaken very slightly on the last word, and she had not let the shake stop her. God help me, it only made it worse, or better. I have never been able to decide which, and after 30 years I have stopped trying. You are right, I said. That would be selfish. I withdraw the question. I stepped back and gave her a bow, a real one, the kind I gave to duchesses and to no one else, from the waist, unhurried, and I saw it register, saw her understand exactly what I had just done, saw the small startled parting of her lips. I will trouble you no more in the corridors, Miss Adair. You have my word, and my word is the one thing about me that has never yet been for sale. And I kept it. I did not lie in wait for her again. I did not manufacture errands or loiter beneath her window. But a man may keep the letter of a promise and break its spirit into 1,000 pieces, and I am ashamed to tell you that this is precisely what I did. I could not seek her out, so I did the next thing, the cleverer and more cowardly thing. I made a place where she might, if she chose, come to me, and I left the door standing open, and I stepped back into the shadows, and I waited to see whether she would walk through it of her own will. I told myself this honored my promise. It did not. It only meant that if my heart broke, I could pretend she had done it, and not I. We are all of us cleverest in the service of the things we should not do. The place was the library, and the door I left open was a book. I found the finest edition I owned of those Greek tragedies, my grandfather's, not my father's. My grandfather had actually read them, and the margins were full of his hand, bound in old red leather, the original Greek on one page and a scholar's notes on the other, and I left it out upon the table where she read, with a single sheet of paper folded inside it. On the paper I had written, and I remember every word, for I wrote it 6 times before I was satisfied and burned the other 5. You said you had never held them in the original. Now you have. They are yours to read whenever you are in this house, for as long as I own it, which will be as long as I live. This is not kindness. It is only justice that a mind like yours should not go hungry for want of a book. R. I signed it only with the initial. I did not sign it the Duke. I did not want her to answer the Duke. I wanted, for once in my life, to be answered as a man, and I had begun to suspect she was the only person alive who could tell the difference, who could see the man inside the title, the way she saw the free woman inside the folded companion, because she knew from the inside exactly what it was to be mistaken for the costume the world had put you in. For 2 days the book sat untouched upon the table, and I told myself I was a fool, and I very nearly took it back and burned the note along with its 5 dead brothers. On the 3rd day I came into the library and found her there in her shaft of gray light, with my grandfather's book open on her knee and my note in her hand, and her face, that careful, folded face, undone. She had been crying. Not weakly, not prettily, nothing at all like the practiced tears I had seen women use as currency. She had been crying fiercely, the way a proud person cries when something has got past a guard they have spent a lifetime building, when a kindness lands in a place that has gone so long without kindness that it no longer has any defense against it. And she looked up at me with the tears still bright on her face and no attempt whatever to hide them, because hiding them would have been a lie, and she said, in a voice not quite steady, "This was very badly done of you, Your Grace. I know. You promised to stop being kind to me." "I promised to stop troubling you in the corridors," I said. "I have kept that promise to the letter. This is not the corridor." "And it is not kindness," I said. "So, look, I wrote it down in my own hand so that I could not later be accused of it. It is justice, and you cannot ask a man to stop being just. It would be quite unreasonable. You are the most reasonable person I have ever met. You will see at once that my position is unassailable." She gave a wet, unwilling laugh and pressed the back of her wrist to her eyes, and the laugh was the most beautiful sound I had heard in 11 years, better than any music I had ever paid to have brought up from town. "You are impossible. I have been told, frequently, by everyone except the people who ought to have told me, who were all too frightened, until a parson's daughter in a gray gown told me I was wrong about a Roman general in front of 11 guests and did not care in the least what it cost her." I crossed the room and sat down across from her, at a proper and respectful distance, my hands where she could see them, the way one sits near a wild thing one does not wish to startle. "I have been alone for a very long time, Miss Adair." I did not know it. That is the strangest part. I did not know it. I built the loneliness myself, brick by brick, and I called each brick strength, and I was rather proud of the wall, and I stood behind it and mistook the silence for respect and the fear for love. And then you contradicted me over the fish, and I looked up, and I saw for the first time that I had built myself a prison, and lived in it for 11 years and called it a castle, and hung my father's portrait in the hall of it, and thought myself a fortunate man. She was very still now, the note held against her breast. "I am not asking anything of you," I went on, and it was already becoming a lie even as I said it, and I think we both heard it become one. "I am not so great a fool as to think. I know what I am and I know what the world would say. I have heard the world say worse of smaller things. I only wanted you to have the book. And I wanted once before the house party ends and you go back to Marrowdale, and I go back to being right about everything and dying of it slowly, 1 degree at a time, like a man freezing who has stopped feeling cold. I wanted to tell one honest person that they had done me good. You have done me good, Miss Adair. You have made me less stupid. You have made me doubt, and I did not know until you came that a man could be grateful to be made to doubt. It is the greatest gift anyone has given me in a decade, and I wished you to know it before you went, in case I never had the chance again." She looked at me for a long moment. The gray light moved on the floor between us, and outside a wind came up off the moor and pressed against the tall windows. "Wren," she said at last very softly, "I beg your pardon. My name, my given name. You keep calling me Miss Adair, and I keep bracing for it every time because that is the name the world uses to keep me in my place. Miss Adair, fetch the shawl. Miss Adair, you are wanted. Miss Adair, you have forgotten yourself. But no one says Wren. My father did. He named me for a small brown bird because he said it was plain and common and paid no mind to being either, and sang anyway, louder than birds 10 times its size, from the highest branch it could find." Her voice caught. "He has been dead 6 years. No one has said my name in 6 years. And if we are being honest creatures with one another, Your Grace, and I find I cannot be anything else with you, which frightens me more than I can say, then I would rather you knew it. The real one. The one that is mine and not the world's." "Wren," I said, and it felt like a vow, though neither of us was brave enough yet to call it one. Then you must call me Alaric, or we are not honest creatures at all, only a duke and a companion playing at honesty, and I have had my fill of playing. I have played at strength my whole life. I find I would rather be true and frightened than false and safe, and you have done that to me, and I do not know whether to thank you or to beg your pardon for it. I cannot call a duke by his Christian name. There is not a servants' hall in England that would not. You corrected a duke's Latin in front of his entire dinner table. I think you may attempt his Christian name. You have already done the far more dangerous thing. And she laughed again, the real laugh, through the last of the tears, and said, Alaric, as though testing whether the roof would come down upon her head for the impertinence. And the roof held, the old gray stone held as it had held for 200 years. And we sat there in the library in the failing gray light, a duke and a parson's daughter, on the far side at last of every wall I had ever built, and I thought with a plunging, terrifying, absolute certainty that no strategy of mine had planned for and no wall of mine could stop. Oh no. I am going to marry this woman. The whole world is going to tell me I cannot, and my aunt is going to have a great deal to say, and the county will talk for a year, and I am going to do it anyway, because I have found the one person alive who tells me the truth, and I am not fool enough, even now, even as afraid as I am, to let her walk back down the road to Merodale and out of my life forever over a matter of whose father had money. But I was a coward yet a while longer, and cowardice, in a man of rank, has a way of dressing itself as prudence. I told myself there was time. I told myself I must be careful for her sake, I said, though it was my own courage I was sparing. And so the days went on, and the house party wore toward its end, and instead of speaking I circled, and we fell into a kind of secret companionship that was sweeter than anything I had known and more dangerous than I understood. We played chess in the evenings when the others were at cards. She was better than I was, which no one had ever been, and she did not once let me win, which no one had ever failed to do. And the first time she took my king she looked up almost anxiously, as though even now she feared the annihilation. And I laughed aloud in a way that turned heads across the room and said, again, at once, I insist upon my revenge, and something eased in her face, and she set the pieces and beat me a second time. We made a wager, foolish and precious. She held that I could not go a single day without pronouncing myself certain of something I did not truly know. I held that I could. The forfeit, if I lost, was that I should read aloud to my aunt for a week, a duty I loathed. If I won, she should walk with me openly in the garden once in daylight, where the whole county might see, and not fold herself small. I lost before luncheon. I did not mind losing. I had begun to suspect that losing to Reine Adair was the nearest thing to winning that life had ever offered me, and I read to my aunt for a week, and my aunt watched me over her spectacles the entire time with a look that said she knew precisely what had happened to her nephew, and was only waiting to see whether he had the courage to admit it. And then came the snow, early that year, a full week before it had any business arriving. It shut the roads for 3 days and trapped the house party indoors, and on the second afternoon I found Wren in the library, of course the library. It was our whole country by then, standing at the tall window watching the snow come down over the moor, and she did not fold when she heard me. That was how I knew something had changed in her too. She did not fold. She only said, without turning, "It is very beautiful. I have never been anywhere beautiful in the winter before." At the parsonage the winter only meant cold and worrying over the coal and my father's cough. She was quiet a moment. I shall remember this window for the rest of my life, I think, whatever happens. This exact window, and the snow and the quiet. Whatever happens, I repeated. You say that as though something is going to happen to part us. Something always parts people like us. That is what people like us are for, to be parted from people like you. She turned from the window then, and there was no bitterness in it, only a clear-eyed sorrow that was somehow harder to bear than bitterness would have been. I have let this go too far, Alaric. I know it. I lie awake and I know it. I have let myself be happy, and I have no right to it. And when your aunt and I take the road back to Merodale next week, I am going to have to learn how to be furniture again, and I do not know any longer whether I can. You have unfitted me for my own life. I told you that you would on the terrace. I told you it was the cruelest thing you could do, and you did it anyway, and I let you, so the fault is as much mine as yours. And I stood there in the snowlight, with the whole shape of my happiness in front of me at the window, and I opened my mouth to say it at last, to say the thing I had known in that room 3 weeks before, and the library door opened, and my aunt's voice cut across the moment, sharp with a fear I had never once heard in it, and everything I meant to say was swept away. Alaric, come, it is the Countess, she has collapsed. My aunt did not die. I will tell you that at once, because I remember too well what it was to not know it, and I would not do that to you even in the telling. But for 4 days we did not know it, and in those 4 days I learned the last thing I needed to learn, and it was Wren who taught it to me, though she did not mean to. She did not leave my aunt's side. The physician came through the snow on a borrowed horse and bled her and shook his head and spoke of the heart, and the fine guests, who had been so glad of my aunt's hospitality, discovered pressing reasons to brave the roads and depart, and within a day the great house had emptied of everyone whose affection had been a fair-weather thing, everyone but the servants, and Wren, and I. Wren sat with my aunt through every night of it. She did not sleep. She read to her in a low voice when my aunt was wakeful and frightened, and held her hand when she was not, and changed the linens with her own hands rather than wait for a maid, and when my aunt in the worst hour wept and said she did not want to die alone, Wren said, "You are not alone. I am here and I will not go, and your nephew is just there by the door, and he is not going anywhere either, and you are the best woman I have ever known, and I am not finished learning from you, so you may not die. I forbid it. I am very stubborn and you know it." And my aunt laughed, a thread of a laugh, and lived. I watched her do all of this. I watched a penniless companion who had every reason in the world to think first of herself, of her precarious place, of what would become of her if her mistress died. I watched her think of none of it, and give everything she had to a frightened old woman out of nothing but love, expecting no reward, because there was no reward, because my aunt could do nothing for her that a dying woman cannot do, and Wren tended her as tenderly as a daughter anyway. And I understood, watching her, that I had had it backward my whole life. I had thought strength was the wall. I had thought love was the thing you could not afford, the weakness, the thing that got past your guard and undid you. And here was the strongest person I had ever known, and her strength was made entirely of love, love freely given to those who could not repay it, and my wall, my great gray wall of fear and certainty, was not strength at all but only the absence of the courage to love and risk the loss of it. I had been a coward calling itself a fortress, and she, who had nothing, who could afford nothing, was braver with her love than I had ever been with all my armies. On the 4th day the fever broke, and my aunt slept easy, and the physician said she would live, and I found Wren in the passage outside the sick room, sunk down on a bench with her back against the wall, so exhausted she could not stand, weeping silently now that it was safe too. I sat down beside her. I did not touch her. I only said, "You would have done that for anyone, even someone who could give you nothing." She is not anyone, she is the woman who let me read. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand. And yes, I would have. What else is a person for? I have been alive 34 years, I said, and I have only just now learned the answer to that question, and you are the one who taught it to me, and you did not even know you were teaching it. I have been for nothing, Wren, all this while, a duke and feared and right about everything and for nothing. And you, who fetch shawls, who have no fortune, who the world would tell me is beneath my notice, you have been for more in 4 days at that bedside than I have managed in my whole life behind my wall. She looked at me, too tired to fold, too tired to guard herself, everything in her face. I did not say it then either. It was not the moment. She was spent and grieving her own fear, and I would not lay so heavy a thing on so tired a shoulder. But I made myself a promise on that bench, a real one, the kind I did not break, that at the first fit moment, come cost or scandal or the whole braying county, I would tell Reine Adair the truth, because she had given me nothing but the truth from the first word she ever spoke to me, and she deserved a man brave enough to give it back. The fit moment came sooner than I wished, and worse, and in front of the entire county. But it came. My aunt, recovering and being who she was, declared that the interrupted house party should be revived and crowned with a ball. The Hunt Ball, the great event of the neighborhood's autumn, partly, I think, to spite her own mortality, and partly because she had by now understood exactly what was happening under her roof, and had decided, in her ferocious way, to force my hand. She had a gown made for Reine over Reine's protests, for a companion at a ball is meant to sit against the wall with the chaperones and the dowagers in gray. My aunt would have none of it. No companion of mine sits among the pillars in gray, she declared from her sickbed, not the girl who forbade me to die. She will be dressed as what she is, which is the finest creature in this house, my nephew not excepted, and if the county does not like it, the county may go home. And she put her in a gown of deep midnight blue. When Reine came down the great stair that night, I forgot, for a moment, how to breathe. I am not a poet, and I will not pretend to be one. I will only tell you that the whole glittering county was assembled in my hall, 400 candles and an orchestra brought up from town, and every jewel in 3 parishes, and I saw none of it, because Reine Adair was coming down my grandfather's staircase in midnight blue with her chin up, and her father's small bird courage in her face, unfolded at last, in front of everyone. And I understood that I had spent my whole life at balls, and had never once until that instant seen anything beautiful at one. And Lady Sophia Vane, standing at my elbow, felt me forget. I have told you she was clever and cold, and that she filed things away. She had come to Blackthorn to become my Duchess. The settlements had been all but discussed before ever Reine corrected my Latin. My aunt had encouraged it before she understood which way the wind had turned. Lady Sophia had watched the wind turn. She had watched it for weeks with her beautiful, patient, calculating eyes, and she had chosen this night, this public night, to loose the one arrow she knew could not miss. I danced with Reine once, only once, and correctly, at a proper and formal distance, my gloved hand barely touching hers, but a duke who has not danced in 3 years does not dance with his aunt's companion without the whole county marking it, and the whole county marked it, and I did not care. I was past caring. I would have danced with her a dozen times, and let them make of it what they liked. It was between the dances that Lady Sophia struck. She did it beautifully. I will grant her that even now, in a bright carrying voice, in a knot of the county's very worst gossips, timed so that Reine was just close enough to hear, and I was just far enough across the room to be unable to reach her before the words landed. Of course one pities her, Lady Sophia said, loud and sweet as poisoned honey. The little Adair creature, reduced to fetching an old woman's shawls. They say the father was a parson, imagine, and left her nothing at all, not a penny, so she must sing for her supper wherever she is taken in. And now she has quite thrown herself at poor Ravenscliff, and he is too well bred to be openly unkind, so she mistakes his charity for warmth. It is really rather sad. Someone kind ought to tell her the truth. A woman of that sort must be so careful. One wrong step, one breath of talk, and she has no character, no place, no bread, nothing at all to fall back upon. She has only the good opinion of her betters, and she is very close, poor thing, to losing even that. It was masterful. It was cruelty made to wear the mask of concern, and it was aimed with a surgeon's precision at the one wound Reine could not defend, not her pride, which was armor enough, but her survival. Lady Sophia was not merely mocking her. She was reminding her, in front of the assembled county, that she stood one whisper from ruin, and reminding her, worse, that a duke's fleeting notice was the very knife that could do the ruining, that a poor woman who is talked of is a poor woman finished, and that by dancing with me, by being seen, by being happy, Ren had already put the noose about her own neck. I saw Ren's face across the ballroom. I saw her understand all of it, every layer in an instant. And I saw her do the thing that broke my heart and told me, past any further possibility of doubt, exactly and entirely who she was. She did not weep. She did not flee, though the door was near and fleeing would have been so easy. She lifted her chin, that plain small bird chin, and she walked not away, which would have been retreat, but straight across the ballroom, through a crowd that parted before her in a hush, to Lady Sophia Vane herself. And she said, in a voice pitched with perfect deliberate care to carry precisely as far as Lady Sophia's had carried, and not 1 inch further. "You are quite right, my lady. I have nothing to fall back upon but my character, and so I have taken very great care of it, which is, I own, a great deal more than some can say who were born with so much to fall back upon that they never troubled to build any character at all. And you are right that someone ought to be told the truth plainly, since we are all so concerned with truth this evening. So permit me. I have not thrown myself at anyone. I have contradicted his Grace's Latin, corrected his Roman history, disagreed with him about a Greek tragedy, beaten him twice at chess, and asked him twice to leave me alone. If that is what throwing oneself at a duke looks like, my lady, then I fear you have been going about it entirely wrong, for I have watched you at it all fortnight, with all your fortune and all your beauty and all your careful arts, and it has not availed you in the very slightest." She paused, and the pause was the most elegant weapon I have ever seen drawn in a ballroom. "I am a companion. I fetch shawls. I sat 4 nights at his aunt's sickbed while your set fled the snow. I am also, I am given to understand, the only person in 3 counties who does not bore his Grace of Ravenscliffe to death. And if the choice before a man is between a woman who fetches shawls and speaks 6 languages, and a woman who has never once in her life said a single thing worth the trouble of remembering, then I think, my lady, that even a duke might be forgiven for finding the shawls the better bargain." The ballroom did not breathe. 400 candles and not one soul breathing. And then, from somewhere over by the pillars, an old man laughed. Lord Fenwick, God keep his hounds and his simple, honest heart, a great helpless bark of delighted laughter, and it broke the dam, and the whole county laughed with him, laughed at last with the freedom of people who have long wished to laugh at Lady Sophia Vane and never dared. She stood in the very center of it with her beauty gone suddenly brittle and useless as a dropped fan, outfought and outthought and outdignified by a parson's daughter in a borrowed blue gown. And she turned white, and then red, and she fled the ballroom, and she left Blackthorn Hall before dawn the following morning, and I am glad to say I never set eyes upon her again. I want to be clear about one thing, because the story could so easily be told wrongly, and Ren would never forgive a wrong telling. She did not humble Lady Sophia out of triumph, and she took no joy in it. When I reached her side at last, and I crossed that ballroom faster than any dignity allowed, faster than a duke has any business moving, her hands were shaking badly, and she said to me under the noise in a voice that only I could hear, "Take me out of here, please, now, before they all see that I am about to be sick." I took her out. I took her onto the cold terrace, into the dark and the last of the early snow, and she stood with her 2 hands pressed flat against the stone balustrade and shook from head to foot, and I understood that the magnificent thing she had just done had cost her every last thing she had, and that she had done it not out of spite, but because Lady Sophia had reached for the one weapon in all the world that could truly destroy her, and Ren had refused with the whole of her stubborn small bird soul. To stand there in her borrowed blue and be destroyed politely, with a curtsy, the way the world expected a woman of her station to accept her own ruin. "You were," I said when I could speak at all, "the bravest thing I have ever seen in my life. And I have seen men charge cannon." "I have just ruined myself," she said, still shaking, staring out at the dark. "You understand that. You must understand it. A companion who makes a scene at a ball, who trades words with an earl's daughter in front of the whole county. I am finished, Alaric. There is no character for me after tonight. Your aunt cannot keep me now, not after this. It would stain her too, and she has been too good to me for me to stain her. I did it because I could not bear it, because I would rather starve upright than be pitied on my knees. And now I shall very likely have the chance to, and it was worth it. And I would do it again this instant, and I have nothing. And then the tears came, at last, in the dark where no one but I could see them. The tears she had refused to spend inside in the light in front of them all. And I did the thing I had promised myself on the bench outside the sick room. I did the thing I had known I would do since the library, since the gray light, since Wren. My father named me for a small brown bird that sang anyway. I turned her gently to face me, there on the dark cold terrace with the snow just beginning again and the light and the music spilling gold from the windows behind us. And I did not kneel, because a proposal upon the knee is a performance, and I did not want with her ever again to perform. I wanted to be true, which she alone had taught me how to be, and so I stood before her as an equal, which she had made me able to do, and I said, "Then fall back on me." She went utterly still, even the shaking stopped. "You said you have nothing to fall back upon. It is not true, and I will not let it stand, for once in my life I am certain of something and I am right about it. You have me. I am asking you to marry me, Wren Adair, not to save you. For you have this very hour proved to 400 witnesses that you need no man saving. You saved yourself in that ballroom more completely than I in all my power ever could have. I am asking because I am 34 years old and I have been alone the whole of my life, and did not know it until a girl in a gray gown told me I was wrong about a Roman general over the fish, and I do not intend to be alone for one single further autumn if you will consent to have me. The county will talk. Let it talk itself hoarse. I have spent 11 years being feared, and it has bought me a cold house and a colder heart and not one honest word, and I would trade every acre and every title and every frightened bow of it for the certain sound of you telling me I am wrong about something over the breakfast things for the rest of my natural life. Marry me. Be a duchess who fetches her own books from her own library, and corrects my Latin before the bishops, and beats me at chess, and never once, so long as we both draw breath, agrees with me to spare my feelings. I have had a bellyful of people sparing my feelings. It nearly killed me by inches, and I never felt the knife. Marry me, and disagree with me until we are both old and gray and impossible together. She looked at me for a long, long time, there in the dark in the falling snow, with the whole gossiping Golden County on the other side of the glass, and I watched her weigh it, the way she weighed everything, honestly, all the way to the bottom. "You understand," she said at last, and her voice had steadied, and there was something rising in it now, something coming up under the last of the tears the way the sun comes up under a gray cloud and turns its whole edge to fire, that I shall make a very bad duchess. I have none of the accomplishments the county recognizes. I cannot simper. I have never in my life dissembled, and I am too old to begin. I shall say precisely what I think at your grand dinners, to your grand guests, and I shall embarrass you thoroughly at least twice in every month, and probably oftener. I am counting upon it. I have hired an orchestra and 400 candles and a great many people I cannot abide, and you would be the first amusement I have had at one of these affairs in a decade. Try again. I have no fortune. I bring you nothing. Not a penny, not an acre, not a name the heralds have ever heard of. You bring me the one single thing I have ever truly wanted and been too proud and too frightened to ask for. You bring me the truth. Do you know what the truth is worth to a man who has not been told it in 11 years? It is worth more than every fortune in England, and I would know, for I have most of them at this ball, and they bore me to my very bones. Try again. I am 25 and plain and poor, and I fetch shawls for a living. You are 25 and the most vividly, ferociously alive human being I have ever had the fortune to stand near, and I have watched you unfold like a book in an empty library, and I have watched you sit 4 nights at a dying woman's bed for love and no wage, and I want, more than I have ever wanted anything, more than I knew a man could want, to spend the whole of the rest of my life making certain that the room you are standing in is never, ever empty again. Try again, Wren. But I warn you, I have run out of things to concede, and I am nearly out of the courage it took to begin, so be merciful and be quick." She began to laugh, then the real laugh, the small bird laugh, breaking up through the tears, and she pressed both her cold hands flat against my chest, not to push me away, but I understood, to feel that I was solid, that I was real, that the door had truly opened and was not, this time, going to swing shut, that the warm room was hers and no one was going to turn her out of it into the snow, and she said, "I have run entirely out of objections." "Then you must surrender the field. You told me the story yourself, in the library, the very first afternoon. The man who runs from the prophecy runs straight into its arms. I have been running from this since the fish course, running with all a duke's dignity and all a coward's speed, and I have run directly into it, and I concede. I have lost, utterly and gladly and forever. You have out-argued me, out-thought me, out-braved me, and outlasted me, and I lay my sword down in the snow at your feet. Now, for the love of everything, Wren, put me out of my misery and give me my answer. And if it is no, be quick and be kind, for I have never once in 34 years felt anything remotely like this, and I have not the smallest idea how long a man is able to stand it." And Wren Adair, my Wren, who feared nothing on this earth, who had walked the length of a silent ballroom to face down an earl's daughter with her very survival hanging in the balance, and had not so much as raised her voice, looked up at the Iron Duke of Ravenscliff with her chin high and her eyes bright and her whole unfolded, unfrightened, unconquered soul plain upon her face, and she gave me my answer in the only way she ever gave me anything in all our years, which was to say, on her own terms, in her own time, and with the very last word held firmly forever, and by right in her own 2 hands. "Yes," she said, "but understand me, only because you were finally, after all these weeks, right about something, and I did so want to reward it. We were married in the little gray church at Ravensmere, 3 weeks later, with my aunt weeping in the front pew and insisting to all who would listen that it was merely the cold. Wren wore no jewels. She would not, though I offered her the whole of the Ravenscliff strongbox. She carried a book instead, my grandfather's book, the red leather one, the tragedies, because, she said, a bride ought to carry the thing that first told her the truth, and it was the note folded inside it that had undone us both, and she would not be married without it in her hands. I have never once argued the point. It was, I think, the wisest thing either of us ever did. I will not pretend the county did not talk. It talked for a full year and more. It called her the companion duchess, and meant it for an insult, and Wren adopted the name that very week and had it worked in thread upon the household linen, cheerfully in her own hand, and wore the insult like a coronet until the county wore itself out and began, grudgingly at first, and then helplessly, and at the last genuinely, to adore her. For it is a very difficult thing to go on despising a woman who is not the smallest bit ashamed of herself, who will feed your children and nurse your fevers and forgive your worst behavior, and then, at your own dinner table, tell you kindly and precisely that you are wrong about a Roman general, and prove it to you in the Latin, and pass you the salt. She never once in 30 years agreed with me to spare my feelings, not once. She told me when I was wrong before the Lords, and I was the better man in the Lords for it. She told me when I was wrong with the tenants, and the estate prospered as it never had under my father's unanswerable certainty. She told me when I was wrong with our own son twice gravely, and she was right both times, and I have thanked her on my knees for it since. And every single time she was right, it felt a little less like defeat, and a little more like being handed back some frozen piece of myself I had cut away in boyhood at that cruel table and forgotten I had ever owned. I had been the Iron Duke, feared and certain and entirely alone, dying by inches at the summit of a cold white mountain of yes. She thawed me out one honest word at a time over 30 years, patiently, the way the spring thaws the moor, and I have been warm every day since, even now, even in the cold that is coming. They still call it a strange match, the few who remember us as we were. A duke and a parson's penniless daughter, a companion who fetched shawls raised to a coronet she brought no fortune to. They cannot make the sum come right. They believe a man of my rank marries for fortune, or for beauty, or for connection and land, and Wren brought me not one of the three, and so they are baffled to this day, and they whisper that it must have been pity, or scandal, or the folly of a proud man past his best. Let them whisper. They have never once understood the sum, and they never shall, because from the very beginning they have been counting the wrong things. I did not marry a companion. I married the only person in the whole of my life who ever told me the plain truth to my face and dared me to be worthy of it. And a man may hold every fortune and every beauty and every rank in England, and sit at the head of the finest table in 3 counties with 400 candles burning and every great name bowing low, and still be starving, still be freezing, still be dying slowly of the cold in a castle he has mistaken, his whole life long, for his own strength. Until one gray autumn evening, over the fish, a small brown-haired woman in an ash-colored gown looks him full and fearless in the eye, and says to him the 3 most beautiful words a proud and lonely man will ever, in all his days, be fortunate enough to hear. That isn't right. I have been grateful for those 3 words every single day of the 30 years I was given. I am grateful for them still now, sitting here in her library. It was always hers, with her red leather book on my knee and the snow coming down over the moor beyond the same tall window where she once told me she would remember it all her life. She was right, of course. She remembered it all her life. So have I. And when I am gone, which will not now be long, I have given orders that they carve no titles upon my stone. None of the great, cold, unanswerable words the world was so eager to give me. Only her name and mine, and beneath them the single truest thing I have ever known, or ever shall. That I was wrong about a great many things for a great many years, and that the finest and most undeserved fortune of my whole life was the woman who was brave enough, and kind enough, and entirely, gloriously unafraid enough, to be the one at last to tell me so.